Some stories are too shameful to admit, but too unforgettable to ignore. The summer I turned 18, everything felt different. Maybe it was me, or maybe it was him. My stepdad, Michael. At first, it was nothing. Just glances, small touches, words that meant more than they should. And then one night, everything changed. Stay and listen, because this is the truth I can't run from. My mom had just left for a conference in another city, leaving me and my stepdad, Michael, alone in the house. It wasn't the first time. She traveled often for work, and I was used to it. Our family dynamic had always been simple. My mom was the responsible one, always making sure everything ran smoothly, while Michael was the laid-back, easygoing stepdad. He wasn't strict, rarely asked too many questions, and always knew how to make people laugh. For most of my teenage years, I never felt uncomfortable around him. In fact, I used to appreciate how different he was from my biological father, who had left when I was a kid. Michael was fun, supportive, and never made me feel like an outsider. At least, that's what I had always believed, until that summer. The change was subtle at first. A lingering glance, an extra long pause in our conversations, a compliment that felt slightly off. Maybe I was just overthinking it. After all, I was an adult now, and people always said you start to see relationships differently as you grow up. But something about the way Michael looked at me made my stomach twist in ways I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't until a quiet evening a few days after Mom left that I really started to notice the shift. We were watching TV together, a casual routine we had done countless times before. But this time, he sat closer than usual. His arm rested along the back of the couch, fingers drumming lightly, barely an inch away from my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of his body, the slow and measured way he breathed. "You've really grown up, Emily," he said suddenly, his voice softer than usual. I laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off. "Well, yeah, that's what happens when time passes," I joked, hoping to ease whatever weird tension had settled between us. He smiled, but there was something unreadable in his expression. "You remind me so much of your mother when she was your age." That statement shouldn't have made me uneasy, but it did. There was something about the way he said it, the way his eyes lingered on mine, that sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the screen, but my mind was racing. Had I imagined it? Was I being paranoid? As the days passed, small moments like that kept happening. His hand brushing against mine for a second too long, a compliment that felt a little too personal, the way his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't outright inappropriate, but there was an unspoken shift in the air between us, and I wasn't sure what to do about it. A week passed, and I did my best to ignore the strange feeling twisting in my stomach whenever Michael was around. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I was reading too much into meaningless moments. That's what I told myself, over and over again, until the night of the storm. It had started in the afternoon, dark clouds rolling in, swallowing the sky whole. By evening, the rain was relentless, hammering against the windows like desperate fingers trying to get in. The wind howled through the trees, and thunder cracked so loudly it made the walls tremble. Then, the power went out. I was alone in my room when it happened, the sudden darkness swallowing me whole. For a few minutes, I just sat there, listening to the storm rage outside, trying to decide if I should just stay put or go downstairs. Then I heard his voice. "Emily?" It came from the hallway, closer than I expected. I stiffened, my pulse kicking up. Yeah, I'm here," I called back. A moment of silence. Then, "You okay?" I hesitated. It was a simple question, an innocent one, but something about the way he asked it, low, careful, made my skin prickle. "I'm fine," I said quickly. Another pause. Then, the soft sound of footsteps retreating down the stairs. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe I was really losing it. Maybe I was just paranoid. Still, The darkness in my room suddenly felt suffocating. Before I could overthink it, I grabbed my phone, dead, of course, and made my way downstairs, following the flickering glow of candlelight. Michael was in the living room, sitting on the couch, a single candle burning on the coffee table. Shadows stretched across his face, making it hard to read his expression. He glanced up when he saw me. "Figured you wouldn't want to sit alone in the dark," he said. I nodded, silently crossing the room to sit on the opposite end of the couch. The distance felt necessary. For a while we just sat there, listening to the rain pounding outside. It should have been peaceful, but the air between us was thick, heavy with something unspoken. Then lightning flashed, illuminating the room for a split second. A deafening clap of thunder followed almost immediately after, shaking the house. Without thinking, I flinched. Before I even registered what was happening, Michael's hand was on mine. Just for a second, just long enough for my breath to catch. I pulled away instinctively. His expression didn't change. If anything, he looked amused. "Still scared of storms?" he asked, voice low. I swallowed hard. "Not really." He didn't say anything after that, just leaned back against the couch, watching me. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was reading into every glance, every touch. But deep down, I knew something had changed between us, and I wasn't sure I liked it. That night, everything changed. I was in the kitchen, staring blankly at the fridge, pretending to be busy. The storm had passed, but the unease inside me hadn't. I could still feel the way Michael had looked at me the night before, the weight of his gaze lingering like a shadow I couldn't shake. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. "Couldn't sleep?" Michael's voice was soft, almost careful. I forced a small smile without turning around. "Just getting some water." I reached for a glass, but my hand was unsteady. I could feel him behind me, too close. My pulse quickened. "Rachel." He said my name in a way that made my stomach knot. I hesitated, gripping the glass tighter. "There's something we need to talk about." His voice was low, unreadable. I swallowed hard. "It's late. Maybe we can—" The doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the air like a blade, sharp and unexpected. Michael froze. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he exhaled, stepping back just as I turned to face him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something. Frustration, disappointment? I couldn't tell. I didn't care. I rushed to the front door, my heart pounding. When I opened it, my breath hitched. Mom. She stood there, suitcase in hand, looking tired but relieved. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug. I caught an early flight. I clung to her for half a second too long. When I pulled back, Michael was behind me, his face carefully neutral. "Surprise," he said, smiling, but his eyes flickered to me just for a moment, just long enough for my skin to prickle. And I knew this wasn't over. After Mom came home, the tension in the house didn't fade. If anything, it thickened, pressing against me like invisible hands. Michael kept his distance, but I could feel his presence in every room, in every glance. One afternoon, he tried to talk to me. "Rachel." I looked up from my phone, every muscle in my body tensed. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We should clear the air." I forced a laugh. "There's nothing to clear." His jaw tightened. "You're acting different." "Am I?" I raised an eyebrow, feigning indifference. Maybe I just realized things aren't what I thought they were. Something flickered in his expression. "Rachel, I never meant to." Mom's voice called from the other room, cutting him off. His eyes darkened for just a second before he stepped back. "Forget it." I turned away before he could see the relief on my face. But later that night, as I caught Mom watching me across the dinner table, her brows slightly furrowed, her lips pressed together, I knew she had started to notice. And I wasn't sure if that made me feel safer or more afraid. After Mom returned, the air in the house didn't settle. It thickened. Michael tried to act normal, but his eyes followed me everywhere. I could feel them burning into my back when I cooked dinner, or lingering too long when we passed each other in the hallway. He kept his distance during the day, but there were moments when he'd corner me, trying to talk. "Rachel," he said one afternoon as I stood at the kitchen counter, pretending to scroll through my phone. His voice was low, almost pleading. "We need to clear the air." I froze, my fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. Clear the air? What did that even mean anymore? "There's nothing to clear," I replied sharply, avoiding his gaze. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. It wasn't accidental this time. It was deliberate. My breath hitched, and for a moment, I felt trapped between anger and something else. Something I didn't want to name. "You're acting different," he murmured, his tone softer now. "Like you're afraid of me." Afraid? Was that what it was? Or was it guilt? Confusion? Something darker? Before I could respond, Mom called from the living room. "Michael, can you help me with these boxes?" He hesitated, his hand still hovering near mine. Then, with a frustrated exhale, he pulled away and walked off, leaving me alone in the kitchen. My heart pounded as I stared down at my trembling hands. Later that night, I caught Mom watching me across the dinner table. Her brow furrowed slightly, her lips pressed together like she wanted to ask something but couldn't find the words. She noticed the way I flinched whenever Michael reached for the salt, or how I avoided sitting next to him altogether. Whatever she saw, or suspected, it made her uneasy, and it terrified me. A few nights later, Mom went out to meet a friend for coffee. The house was quiet, just the two of us again. Michael found me in the living room, scrolling absently through social media. He sat down beside me, closer than usual, and leaned in until his shoulder brushed against mine. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "This tension, it's tearing us apart." His words sent a jolt through me. Tearing us apart? As if there was an us. But before I could protest, he reached out, his fingers grazing my cheek. My skin tingled under his touch, and for a split second, I didn't pull away. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same storm swirling in his eyes that I felt inside me. For all the wrongness of it, there was something magnetic about the way he looked at me, like no one else existed in his world except me. And despite everything screaming in my head to stop, I let him lean closer. His lips brushed mine, tentative at first, then more insistent. My body responded before my mind could catch up, melting into the kiss as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close, and for a fleeting moment, I forgot where we were, who we were, what this meant. But reality came crashing back when the doorbell rang. We both froze, our breaths shallow and uneven. Michael pulled away slowly, his expression panicked. "What the hell are we doing?" he whispered harshly. I didn't answer. Instead, I scrambled to my feet, my cheeks burning with shame and confusion. Before I could say anything, the sound of keys rattling in the lock echoed through the house. Mom walked in, her face pale and drawn. "Michael," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "We need to talk. Now." Her eyes flicked to me briefly, sharp and searching, before settling on him. There was no mistaking the suspicion in her gaze, or the hurt. Michael stood up, his shoulders tense. "Okay," he said, his voice strained. He glanced at me one last time, his expression unreadable, before following her into the kitchen. I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. She knew. Somehow she knew. And now everything was about to unravel. The argument in the kitchen carried on in hushed tones, though I could hear the occasional rise in their voices. Words like trust and betrayal floated through the walls, making my stomach churn. I wanted to run, to escape the suffocating weight of what had happened, but my legs refused to move. Eventually, Mom emerged, her face streaked with tears. She looked at me, her eyes filled with pain and betrayal. "Rachel," she said softly, her voice breaking. Did something happen?" I opened my mouth to deny it, to protect her from the truth. but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked away, unable to meet her gaze. She nodded slowly as if she already knew the answer. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked out the door, slamming it behind her. Michael appeared a moment later, his face pale and hollow. "She's leaving," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's taking you with her." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, I'm not going anywhere." But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. Our family was broken beyond repair, shattered by secrets and lies that neither of us could take back. I sat there in silence, the dim light from the living room casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, I heard the car engine roar to life, Mom's hands trembling on the steering wheel, her heart breaking with every second that passed. The tires crunched against the gravel driveway, and then, nothing, just the hollow echo of emptiness stretching out before me. Michael stood behind me, frozen like a statue carved from guilt and regret. He didn't say a word, but his presence was suffocating, like the weight of everything we'd done had finally collapsed around us. My fingers brushed against my lips, where the memory of his kiss still lingered. But instead of warmth or passion, all I felt now was shame. A bitter, unshakable shame. "We messed up so badly," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the truth. But the words weren't for him. They were for me. For the part of me that let this happen. For the part of me that couldn't stop it. And as I stared out the window into the pitch-black night, I couldn't help but wonder, is there any way to fix what we've broken? Or will this shadow always follow me, no matter how far I run? The storm outside had ended, but inside me, the tempest raged on. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about Michael or Mom. It was about who I was now, who I'd become because of these choices. Could I ever forgive myself? Would they? As I gazed at the starless sky, I realized something terrifying. Sometimes, the hardest questions don't have answers. And maybe that's what made them hurt the most. Question to the reader. If you were me, if you were Rachel, what would you do? Would you face the truth head on, even if it meant losing everything you once held dear? Would you stay silent, clinging to the fragile remains of your family, hoping time could heal wounds too deep to name? Or would you walk away from it all, leaving behind the people and memories that shaped you, in search of a fresh start? The choice is yours, but remember, every decision comes with a price. So tell me, what would you do?